Welcome to Identified.
Whether you know you're loving someone or not. Because it's like family, you don't think about love all the time. It's like as much as there is love, you're not like, I love my mom so much all day, every day. It's just not the way that you process. Mm-hmm. Relationships grow in tiny little increments and little fights and little, working out of things over time. And I think that family for me feels like the people that like stay, through the ways you shift and change and evolve, people that stay, through the difficulties you have with one another, the people that you stay with through their changes, like who keeps your interest? Like even when people are like fundamentally fairly uninteresting, when you get like super proximate to them, like people are fascinating from a distance. Like everybody is so interesting. I want to know all about your family. And at a certain point, it's just like, what's for dinner?
Right.
It's like, there's nothing in the fridge that I want to eat is like if you reduce the human experience on any given day to like what it actually is, it's like, I don't know, like my stomach hurts. Like I can't find my keys.
Right.
Like what's for dinner? I'm hungry. I'm late for the gym. Like all of this is truly like anybody's normal Tuesday is like pretty normal Tuesday. Like, so who are people that you just find infinitely fascinating and it's mutual, feel like the people that become your family when it's sustained over time.
Hello, I'm Nabil Ayers, author, music executive, and host of Identified, the podcast that delves deep into the complex world of family and identity. In this episode, my guest is Lisa Lucas, a prominent figure in the publishing world who has worked with renowned authors such as Art Spiegelman, Layla Lalami, and Margot Jefferson. In 2022, Lisa was the subject of an in-depth New York Times Magazine feature about the lack of diversity in the book publishing business. In our conversation, Lisa shares stories of her childhood growing up in a racially diverse New Jersey suburb, where she was exposed to many different cultures and family structures from a young age. It gave her an openness to finding family and stability outside of traditional family relationships. Lisa describes the strong intellectual drive that was passed down through her family, even though they didn't necessarily come from privilege or education. She sees this curiosity and love of learning as a binding thread across generations. Stay tuned to hear what family means for Lisa, how grief has impacted that definition, and why family is as much a practice as a feeling, built through tiny daily interactions over time. Here's my conversation with Lisa.
I think of, my four grandparents as the sort of origin point of like all of the nuttiness and the lovingness of, the family. But so all four of my grandparents were Black. One is still living, my grandmother. Through a variety of different turns and lucky opportunities and hard work and intelligence or whatever, they were all born like in the early 30s, 32, 33. My maternal grandparents were born in New York City. My grandmother was born in Bed-Stuy, and I believe that my grandfather was from Brooklyn, but they all ended up in Flushing. But, the interesting thing about them is, so my grandmother became a teacher when she was young. She was just like a young woman. She got married when she was 19, had my dad when she was 19.
Which is all like pretty normal.
I think she was like 21 or 20 when she had my uncle. But, she became a school teacher, finished up. She went to Hunter College and became a school teacher and did that. But when her and my grandfather broke up, they got divorced, she went back to grad school. And so she got her PhD in education from Columbia. He was a doctor. He was like a neighborhood doctor in St. Albans and in the Army. And he went to Cornell for graduate school to become a physician. So that's my father's parents. And like, to be clear, none of them were like wealthy people. My grandmother on my mother's side, Velma, went to the University of Chicago, as I did too. And she was, I think, as I understand it, she matriculated at 15. I have no idea, but I think that Susan Sontag and Bob Silvers, who was the editor of the New York Review of Books, also went to lab school in Hyde Park. And they went to University of Chicago, and they both matriculated at 15. They were both born in the same year as my grandmother. So they must have been a part of that same program. But my grandmother's been, I realized this after she passed away, and there's just no way to really confirm it without like getting archival about it. And I'm just not in that place in my life. Her first husband, my maternal grandfather, Lawrence Harrison. He, after my mother was born and my grandparents were divorcing, it's largely understood that he was gay. And he was like, well, I'm going to go get my PhD at the University of Oklahoma. And then my grandmother went to go get her graduate degree at the Art Institute of Chicago in painting, and then another master's degree in education. So I say that this was
smart
sort of
family.
So they were really smart, but beyond that, I just think whatever it was about their parents, again, like not like super wealthy people, not people who had come from education necessarily. Some did, some didn't. But they really were strivers, right? And they were also, they didn't like want to be, they didn't want to start the biggest business in the world. They were educators and they were neighborhood doctors. So they were this interesting kind of success, but I feel like it all starts with them because there was this tone set across all four of them that was just education.
Yeah.
And then that was like being learned on some level, knowing something, being curious. And they were all like real consumers of art and opera and literature.
Culture.
And culture. And they were all just really engaged in these interesting ways. And I have to say, like, I didn't know my grandfather on my mother's side at all. And I didn't know my grandfather on my father's side at all because both of them had early divorces and like just weren't really super around. My grandfather on my mother's side died before I was born, but he wasn't super around.
So the grandmothers were around.
So the grandmothers were. But even my mother's mother wasn't super around because she had some struggles earlier on in her life and just was not as like present. The grandmothers really were around, but all of them really valued a lot of things, whether I knew them or didn't know them, that like are a part of me and that are a part of my parents. And if I had kids, I'm sure it would have been a part of them. And it feels this like this lineage,
right.
And it doesn't seem to have to do with, it seems neither genetic nor familial. It just feels like my people.
It's just there.
Right? Like we're this block. Like it's like if you're like, people from here, tend to like cheese. It's just like culturally,
right.
Like what's the word that I'm looking for? But like just affiliation, or not affiliations, but like what we're attracted to.
Right.
Like the kind of person that we become.
And so your parents obviously have this sort of continue the thread.
Yeah, but they both ran away from home when they were teenagers, right? Oh. Like briefly. They were all very connected to their families, but like, it was the 70s, and they were like, look, listen, my dad wanted to be a guitar player and his, professionalized black parents who had sacrificed basically everything to get where they were like, you want to do who, right. What, when,
that's
where,
like a backward
why,
step,
how?
Right? Yeah.
You want to play the guitar? You're 16 years old. Like you need to go to college. You need to do whatever. And my dad was like, excuse me. But the willfulness, I think that it took to be born in 1933 and to be the people that they became.
Yeah.
I don't know that going to grad school really means anything. I didn't go to grad school. My dad didn't finish high school. But the willfulness to do what you want to do the way that you want to do it, that for me is the thing. And so when I think of my family, I think of like a bunch of very, very willful people who are very, very much a part of the living world, right? Very much a part of sort of like what we're reading, what we're listening to, what we're dancing to.
Right. So you equate your father's ambition to play guitar. That's the same thing as his parents wanting to go to grad school, to go to
absolutely.
college.
And my dad was never like the like my heart beats for music,
right.
kind of guy. He was like, this is what I'm very good at. This is what I love.
Yeah.
And this is my job.
It's fun.
And and he loved it. But it's like, but he definitely wasn't like, man, if I'm not making music, then I've got to lay down. And what he felt was that his children were that thing. He always said and gave off the vibe that like his reason to be was his children, and that was like deeply satisfying for him. You see him around a little kid when, like when there was a baby around, somebody, maybe there was a new niece or nephew born, and he was just like a baby that I get to hang out with, right? Like what was better than another little person that was like your people?
Right.
And that was for him, more, I think, the desire, the sort of like dogged, like,
Right.
Like I can't do anything if I don't have these people around me. It was family.
Yeah. Did you grow up with both of your parents?
I grew up, my parents were divorced. So I grew up in New Jersey and my mom lived in one town and my dad lived 20 minutes away. And I sort of went back and forth between the two of them. But I was also really close. Part of my family is like everybody got divorced. So it's like a big family of second marriages. And so I have a lot of step parents and, family that's family, but like they were always really multicultural. So there's like my Chinese uncle and my, Jewish grandpa and,
cool.
All of these other people that were so much my family. Like my grandfather, who was like a Jewish man from Whitestone, Queens, that was actually my grandmother's divorce lawyer's son. Walensky. Full service operation. Like, he was there the day I was born. He like was just so excited that I was there. My mother, my father, my stepmother, my grandmother, my grandfather on my father's side, but my grandfather meaning my step-grandfather. Mm-hmm. These are the people, right, that really brought me up.
Right.
And he's as much a part of that as anything. He'd come over in the 10s and 20s. And so they were definitely fleeing, but they weren't fleeing the war. But many people were left behind. And so I remember going to see Schindler's List with him. Or somebody went to see Schindler's List with him. I can't remember. Right. It's like one of those stories that becomes a mythology, and it's like maybe somebody else's memory. But he got up and walked out because he just couldn't handle seeing it because so many people had been killed. And, he didn't talk about that sort of thing a lot. A lot of people from that generation, I think, didn't.
Right.
But he very much would have been, in his 20s as a Jewish person living in New York watching the Holocaust happen.
Oh, my God.
But it's interesting how somebody else's story can kind of define your own. And it's like, I'm not genetically related to him. I'm not, a practicing Jewish person. You know what I mean?
Family.
But he's my family. And so it's like, I do feel very much, so I think that part of the way that I understand family, thinking about my original 4 grandparents, thinking about my step-grandparent, thinking about my stepmother, who's been a big part of my life alongside my genetic parents who have been a huge part of my life. This sort of glomming on of people and experiences that become your own, it's always been a build a family, right? Because there's always been adaptations inside of them.
Yeah.
So becoming an adult was really like, so many of my friends are my family. Like my cats are my family. My colleagues are my family. I tend to be very familial at work. And to really think about it like, well, how do we create a family that works? And over the years, just people you've worked with for a decade, it's like this woman, Jordan Smith, who I worked with at Tribeca Film Institute many years ago, and then worked with her at the National Book Foundation. And in between, we did projects together. Like, that's family.
That's a long time. 10 years
family.
is
15 years now that we've known each other.
That's longer than a lot of marriages. That's longer than
no, so she's family. I remember, both of her babies being born, the first dog, the dog passing, the next dog, do you know what I mean? The marriage, the son, the daughter, the whole thing. It's just like, I feel as invested in the story and being proximate to the story and her children as I would for any other family member.
I'm curious, when you were a kid in New Jersey, divorced parents, all this extended family of different races, different religions. Did you have a different idea of what family was than all the other kids? Were you different? Did you feel different? Or was that what it was like?
I think there was a lot more sort of like divorce and, kind of messiness of, sort of maybe a slightly more bohemian family in some ways. Although I wouldn't call them bohemians. I would say that they were like bohemian adjacent. But not bohemian. They were more just bougie.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Or bougie aspirational, right?
Right.
No, I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. I was born in New York. We lived in Union Square when it was like hipsterville, like right in like the early 80s. And then moved to Teaneck, New Jersey, which is like it was the first voluntarily desegregated school system in the country.
Not then, earlier than...
No, earlier than my childhood. Like, it was the first one when schools needed to desegregate.
Right. Yeah.
So, what happened was it was just... And I don't actually know the history of why Teaneck was so diverse, but you have a lot of jazz musicians that lived there.
Right.
Donald Byrd lived there, and then, from the R&B world, right, you have like the Isley Brothers, Teaneck Records.
Oh, really?
And so you have a lot of musicians. Lenny White is a Teaneck person. So you have like kind of like that underpinning of art in Teaneck, right? You also had like a very, very strong Jewish community. And I don't know how or when that community became a part of Teaneck. But, there was also a lot of people who'd come out of the civil rights movement and had grown up, feeling deep solidarity across Jewish and Black culture.
Yeah.
And so you had an enormous, enormous number of interracial marriages. And many of them were Jewish and Black families. The multiculturalness of my experience, despite being like a Black child with 2 Black parents, 4 Black grandparents.
And a white Jewish grandparent.
And a white Jewish grandparent and a Chinese uncle, you know what I mean? And like all this other stuff. But like I really was like a Black child, but who lived in this very Benetton family, who grew up in this really Benetton town. Which is not to say that there weren't issues, right? Of course there were. But growing up, seeing different types of people and having those kinds of relationships. Like, I have one friend... who's like sort of just like your traditional African-American, growing up in a town, that had a lot of Black folks in it.
Right.
Right. And then you have, the kid who's half Jewish and half Black. And then you have like your Indian friend. And then you have, there were like a lot of like Korean kids in my school and Filipino kids in my school. And so it was just really like, you kind of just got to see everybody making it every kind of way.
Right.
And it was also like just a very middle class town, right? It was like not a town with a lot of wealth. It was not a town with a lot of poverty. It was just like little ranch houses in Teaneck, New Jersey. And it was just like a really simple town.
Right.
And it was really great.
It sounds amazing. It sounds like...
I mean, again, it was a little like, you know, it was a little suburban.
Right.
Like it definitely had like a suburban spirit.
But close to New York.
Yeah,
like you come in for the weekend.
That's a long. That distance can be longer than you think,
really?
Right?
How
like,
long is it?
Like, well, it's not no time at all,
right?
Geographically or time wise, but emotionally, I think that there can be a real big bridge between New York City and New Jersey, even if you're just like right over the bridge.
Yeah,
you know, it's really easy to just be like, I don't go that way.
Right.
I go left.
Right.
I do not take the right. So, you know, there were parts of my childhood that were very city, but I think like my friends were always like, well, you really like the city. You know, I was like, you don't? What in the world? You want to go to the mall?
Did you go into the city with your father? Was he playing music a lot then? Like, was that a thing?
You know, so my parents it was the 80s. Divorces were weird then. You know, like conscious uncoupling was not really a thing. You know, it was more the irreconcilable differences generation. So, you know, I think my parents had a bit of a fuss. And so, you know, for a long time, I could only see my father on Sundays. And it would kind of be like in the wild. We wouldn't go to his house. He just could pick me up and we'd spend the day together. Right. So, you know, I think a lot of those early was like, let's go to the museum. Well, the museum's like 40 minutes away. So like, let's drive to the city and go to the Museum of Natural History. Or, you know, so a lot of my childhood memories were just of like sort of your regular outings. We were also close. The school took you to the city a lot. Right. You know, my parents were both working in the city. Their friends were still in the city largely. You know, so there were just like a million reasons, you know, to sort of just constantly be shooting in. And Teaneck is really like a few miles from the bridge, the George Washington Bridge. It's like you're really close. Yeah. You know, if you're really feeling it, I guess you could walk. I wouldn't. You know, the Palisades are pretty, but, you know, you could technically probably do that.
Right.
But then I started working in the city when I was 15 as an intern.
Wow.
You know, my mom would take me in and she would drive to work. And, you know, so it wasn't like I was just like getting on the bus every day. Right. Although I did once sneak into New York with my friend Kendall in middle school, to go to the Black Expo. We were like, we're going to get on the bus and go to New York City and go to the Black Expo. And we're not going to tell anybody. We're just going to do it. And would you believe that I ran into my mother smack in the street? She did not see us. But we walked by, I said, that is my mother. You know, like at the Javits Center, outside the Javits Center. 8
people here.
You know, 8 million people here. And it's like, and I have to run into my mom. Classic. So, you know, it was a small world. But it was between work and, you know, going to see a lot of theater. My grandfather really liked to see plays. So he would always take me to musicals. So I think of Broadway a lot when I think of the city. I think of, you know, museums and movies and parties at people's houses, like, you know, sleeping amongst the coats at some like musician's house, you know, for some party.
Sounds great.
You know, in the kids, not the kids room. There was no kid room. Like the 80s, 90s, this was not a place where you had the kids room. I remember my mom taking me to like, you remember Sugar Bar? No. From a million years ago? I mean, this is like deep 90s. Right. Like place that everybody liked to go. And I remember her being like, we have to go to this party. I have to go to this party and you're coming with me. And I was like, Clarissa Explains It All is on tonight. I was like, and they are going to kiss. And if I miss it, I'm going to die. Right. And I missed it. I still have never seen that episode.
You can probably see it.
Still resentful. No, I don't want to because it's like, then I have to forgive.
Right. Right. Have you experienced much grief or loss in your family?
Yeah, enormous. My dad died in 2018, and he had just turned 65. And it was atrocious. I mean, he was like my favorite person. And we were really close. You know, we would talk on the phone for hours every week, forever and ever. You know, it's like, because, you know, I came from like a divorce family. And it wasn't always, you know, that I went to college and I was, you know, I was really like, I think needed to just establish boundaries when I was in my 20s and really, even though I was close, I was in the city, I didn't want to come home. Yeah. You know, and so we just developed this phone relationship. I mean, I saw him all the time too, like for holidays or whatever, but we really talked on the phone a lot and it was amazing. He was great. Sometimes we'd come to Soho where we are right now and go to Blue Ribbon Sushi, which he really loved. Like, so we'd have these little funny dates, you know, like where we'd just go out and it'd be like, father, daughter, we're going to go to the bookstore and we're going to, and, you know, like a tradition. You eat all the yellowtail hand rolls you want. because you're like 20s and broke. And, but like, so anyway, he was just like my favorite person. And he just like, really, like I said earlier, he was really a person who really loved his children. I think my brother, in a very different way than I experienced it, like felt the same way about my dad. Like he was just like our best friend. He was really the best. And, he had a heart attack when he was 38. And it was like a really like unexpected, like, they kept being like, are you on drugs? And it was like, no, I don't do drugs. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It was just kind of a freak heart attack, but it was a massive one and it damaged his heart. So, all those years later, he just couldn't make it. But it was having a parent in the ICU for months.
Oh, wow.
And having to sort of make really difficult choices about somebody that you really weren't ready to let go of at any level. It was hard. I think it was, grief because you miss somebody. My brother was 25, I think, and I was 38. And I think both of us like didn't think we wouldn't have, he was so, vital.
Yeah, that's young for everybody.
And present. And, it was just really hard. But no, that was a big grief. But I think, grief can be a lot of different things. Like grief is death, and losing someone, but my grandmother is 90, and I think that she's been such a close person to me, another person that I could yak on the phone with. I mean, there was one day, it was a snow day, and we spent 8 hours on the phone together. It was like, hold on, Grandma, I gotta go pee. Hold on, Grandma, I gotta go make a sandwich. And we just stayed on the phone all day long, yakking. But, those conversations have been long gone now. We wouldn't do an 8-hour conversation about like our love lives or my love life, the family and the business and, all the stuff, so I grieve, that. I miss the way it was. Like, I think I have a lot of, as you get older, I think there's just grief of like what was. I mean, the world changes. And at a certain point, like the things you remember on, Route 17 that you used to do when you were going to get like your Girl Scout outfit or whatever, it's just gone. Yeah. It's like shit just looks different. Like Route 17 is like Petco's and, like massive chains. And you're like, that's not where I did all that stuff as a child. So, it's like, I feel grief over just like time passing. I love the future. Well, it has been a little gnarly. I'm not sure I love right now.
Some things.
I love some of the things about right now. I love being here right now, right? No matter what is going on. I love life. But, I'm nostalgic, so it's like, so grief is like, immediately my dad, my grandfather also passed away when I was 20. My grandfather, Melvin Walensky, died when I was 24. He was 83. He wasn't young. He was neither old yet either. It's like now that as I get to the halfway mark, I'm like, well, 83 seems a little young.
Right.
But, he lived a good long life and he was really happy and he definitely just like had a heart attack and died immediately, which is like a great way to go.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? It was like, he didn't even know he was dying. He just was like doing something, then he was dead. Oh. But I miss him still. It's like there's so much of my life he never got to see and he was so invested and it's such a, one of the principal architects of everything that is possible for me in this world, right? Never got to see it.
Wow, what an incredible way to remember him, though, to talk about him.
Well, yeah.
Principal
he
architect.
just was the best. Like, that man used to come to my house to pick me up every single Tuesday for the overwhelming majority of my young life. And it would be like, do you want to go have dinner? Do you want to go to the bookstore? As I got older, it was, do you need some makeup? Do you want to see a play? Whatever. Do you want to go to the video game store when I was obsessed with video games as a young person? The bookstore. You'd always go buy a book. And we would just hang out. And he just wanted to make sure, because again, I was, grew up in like a kind of, situation where there was a big divorce and, and I was like, 90s latchkey kid, mom's working, dad's working, everybody's kind of like doing whatever. And he was like, well, we're going to spend some time.
So he was like a lot of stability in your life.
He was him and my grandmother were huge. Everybody did their part. Everybody did their part. Nobody like really let me down. But he really was just so consistent.
Yeah.
And just also just like, like then there's some people in the world who just like really fucking like you.
Right.
Like who just
feels good,
really, really like think you're the bee's knees.
Right.
And he really was like, she's my favorite.
Right.
Like, full stop. That's just it. Like, I was just his favorite. And he was my favorite. Just like my dad, it was easy. It was like, oh, he's my favorite. I'm never unhappy around him. Like, I can't think of a single moment where it was like, I'd be bummed to hang out with dad. Or bummed to hang out with grandpa. I mean, he did get a little deaf at the end. That was like a little bit of like, well, I'm going to maybe take a day and not scream every direction. Generally speaking, it was just like mad fun at all times to be with my grandfather. And he really like did so much for me, So I really mean it when it's just like principal architect, of the person that I am. He really made sure nothing ever stopped moving.
Yep. It's a great credit. So what is family to you?
Ooh, what's family? I mean, I think family are the people that love you and are there and are not going to go away, right? Like, it's like, so much is fleeting, right? A job, you can get fired or you change your mind or you don't want to be there or quit or whatever. But it's like employment is almost like based on like your ability, your freedom to leave and their freedom to let go of you. Even if it's your own business, you can sell it.
Right.
Right. It's like, it's so easy, but relationships just don't have that same, tossability. It's like there's a permanence to sort of, even if you're not with people, like the relationship I had with my father and my grandfather was so strong. I can still smell them. I can still like tell you what their hair texture was. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like if somebody said, touch this head, I'd be like, is that daddy's head?
Right. Wow.
There's just a permanence to the emotion. And I think when you spend a lot of time, whether you're loving someone or not, because it's like family, you don't think about love all the time. It's like as much as there is love, you're not like, I love my mom so much all day, every day. It's just not the way that you process. Relationships grow in tiny little increments and little fights and little, working out of things over time. And I think that family for me feels like the people that like stay, through the ways you shift and change and evolve, people that stay, through the difficulties you have with one another, the people that you stay with through their changes, like who keeps your interest? Like even when people are like fundamentally fairly uninteresting, when you get like super proximate to them, like people are fascinating from a distance. Like everybody is so interesting. I want to know all about your family. And at a certain point, it's just like, what's for dinner?
Right.
It's like, there's nothing in the fridge that I want to eat is like if you reduce the human experience on any given day to like what it actually is, it's like, I don't know, like my stomach hurts. Like I can't find my keys.
Right.
Like what's for dinner? I'm hungry. I'm late for the gym. Like all of this is truly like anybody's normal Tuesday is like pretty normal Tuesday. Like, so who are people that you just find infinitely fascinating and it's mutual, feel like the people that become your family when it's sustained over time. I think of like, my college friend Seth is my family, and my friend Rhonda, who I met in my 20s, is my family. They're the people that have been there for, the funerals or the happy moments or the, landmark birthdays, but mostly you were just there on a Tuesday when you want to tell them something funny, but it's just like the first person you want to share with or the person who you actually share vulnerability with. Mm-hmm. These people to me feel like family because it's not cheap for me. You know what I mean? It's like not like I can be very open and very transparent person. And so it's like, there's like a faux intimacy you can create with people. Right. And we do that every day. It's like you smile, you ask, what people respond to. You learn whatever charm you have in you, you learn how to deploy it. Right. Whatever charisma you have, you learn how to deploy it. And so you can enjoy like warmth with so many people, but it's not depth. And I think when warmth and depth meet and, sort of are multiplied by time, you have people that feel a lot more like family than we really let ourselves understand or believe. But I've always, for me, because I have such a non-traditional family in a lot of ways, and the setup was really non-traditional, and because everybody was just going through so many different things, professionally, personally, racially, you name it, I definitely was always looking for stability. There's like one person in my life who sort of started as a mentor and, became a friend and really feels like a mother now, and I don't know when that happened. And I know that it's like, sometimes I'm like, I know you're not my mom, but.
Right. There wasn't like a defining moment.
There's not a defining moment. Although there was like one argument on Mother's Day over a work thing that we were doing. And it was just sort of like, now we're really related because we're fighting on Mother's Day and everybody's furious and we're just going to like part ways for the day. But, there's something very distinct about familial love. I don't know how to articulate it, but you feel it. You can look at somebody that you adore and then you look at somebody and you're like, that's family. And I don't know if it's about the risks you're willing to take for them or what you're willing to sacrifice or or what it is, but there's just something intangible, but like absolutely knowable.
Yeah,
that's like a feeling,
and largely indefinable, but you can feel it.
And I think people create boundaries. Family is who you're related to.
Right.
And then now everybody's like, well, my chosen family, right? Which is actually great. And I think like it's really easy to mock like all these words that we come up with to sort of try to articulate what the modern condition is. But
but we're both talking about it. I said
conscious uncoupling earlier. That's just entered the lexicon. So here we find ourselves. Yeah. But, for me, because I had a non-traditional experience, to circle back to what I was saying, I think I've always been really open to sort of family existing outside of family. Right. I've always been able to bond with people in a familial way without feeling like it was inappropriate or...
I think we have that in common. My thing is often in the last couple of years, it's seriously just been like, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Like it seems like we're both into this. If we're not, that's another thing. But if we are, it's kind of just like, no, but I mean, that's like the why not is in my head. And I can see that it's in theirs too, because we're still texting or still talking and it's been a couple of years, whatever. Like that's kind of it. Yeah. Like we agree.
And I love meeting people's families too. It's like there's a certain kind of integration of lives that I think, speaks to what family is, right? Like it's like family is, a feeling, which we talked about, it's very much a feeling, but it's also like a practice, right? And you can go out of practice and still be like a person who does yoga and be like, I haven't practiced in a while, but you're still really fundamentally a person who like thinks in terms of yoga. Like it's like that's in you when you do enough of it, I think.
Yeah.
And so it is a practice, which doesn't mean it can't lapse, but I think that it is a practice and it's practical, right? Like a lot of human life is about need and support. Do you know what I mean? At a certain point, you need to like go get your wisdom teeth out and like somebody needs to pick you up. I'm not married, and so I didn't create that kind of family unit, where you have an easy emergency contact that lives down the block or who's the person who has your house key in case you lock yourself out. These are really like actual familial concerns a lot of the time. And they're really, really, really important. And for me as a person who's like largely lived alone, and I've obviously had relationships, but a lot of them were like long distance or it's just been like a kind of like, again, sort of like non-traditional life in some ways. You have to sort of figure out who your people are. Because at a certain point, you might get hit by a truck and need to be taken, you need somebody to sit with you at the hospital. And your family might be in another state, so who are the people, that you can count on that are around you? And you don't always want to count on your mom and your dad, your stepmom. It's like at a certain point, I don't want them as my emergency contact, actually. It's embarrassing. Who's your emergency? How old are you? 44. Who's your emergency contact? Mommy. So it's like, I think for married people, it's really easy because there's like a systemic way of understanding your quote unquote chosen family, right?
Yeah.
And for people who are not married, you have to really fight. And this, like, you can think about this in terms of queerness. You can think about it in terms of all sorts of things. But for any kind of person who is not sort of a part of institutionalized family, you have to work really hard, to sort of make sure that you have the things that you need. So I think that there's like a really strong component of support and need and really basic stuff that we didn't like start dealing with everybody else's annoyances and smells and opinions and like just things that like you don't want them to do with people who are literally not you, like interrupting your flow all the time. Like we don't do that just because it's fun.
Right. You do it
because we need, right? Yeah. Like if we lived in the cave and it was 1,000,000 years ago, like it's like you need some people around. Somebody could beat you up, right? Somebody's got to go get the food. Somebody's got to keep the fire going. Somebody's got to make the babies so that there's somebody to like do the work. You need the unit. That's very important. And so I think that I think we forget about the actual fact that family serves a function. And even if we don't think about the world the way that we used to think about the world, like it serves a function.
Right. That's the history. Thanks for tuning in. Please consider subscribing to Identified wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And be sure to check out Identified on YouTube and identifiedpod.com, where you can watch videos from our interviews. Our executive producer is Kieron Banerji, and the show is produced by Palm Tree Island. The music for Identified is by Noella and Patricia Brennan. I'm Nabil Ayers. Thanks for tuning in.